Video gaan nie hoor.
Okay, so thank you, Karina, for starting the recording. I also just want to again confirm we are quite a large group today, so please double check that you are muted. If not, please mute yourself. Karina, you're ready? Anneke, can I start? Fantastic. So for everybody that just joined, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Yanni Wiggett, and I'm pretty much part of the JVR furniture, well, an industrial psychologist here at JVR, and also the manager of the product and research team. Now, I would like to start by thanking all of you for joining us for our first EQI Youth Masterclass webinar, and I hope that this is the first of many. Before I get started, I want to quickly just touch on some housekeeping rules. I've mentioned that please to keep yourself muted throughout the session would be great. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation today. So you can, at any point in time, please add comments, questions, thoughts in the chat function of Zoom there at the bottom. And we will hopefully at the end of the session get to them and to at least answer some of them. If we possibly run out of time, we will also make sure that we do comment and answer those questions posted and send them through post-webinar to you. We will also add the recording of the session. We will have slides sent through to you as well. And we will also be taking you through or sending through some helpful tools which we will be discussing in the session as well. So I think that is pretty much the housekeeping rules for today. But let's get started with a brief introduction of the presenters that you will see on the screen as well. Now, Anneke Stolz is a research psychologist and the actual developer of the EQI Youth adaptation, which is central to all the case studies that we will be discussing. Now, she is without a doubt, Anneke, the person who is most knowledgeable about the EQI Youth assessment in the whole world. So if there's any question that you have, she would likely be able to answer that one. And then just underneath her is Dr. Karina de Bruin, who is the Managing Director of JVR Academy. Now, she's also the official accredited EQI 2.0 trainer here at JVR, and also then central to pretty much all programs that is run or implemented that makes use of emotional intelligence and the development thereof, whether it is for the EQI 2.0, more in an organizational setting, or then from a youth perspective as well. So I can't think of a more knowledgeable emotional intelligence practitioner out there than what Karina is. So one can imagine. Yes.
Yanni, I thought you're going to say you don't know. I thought two things. The first one is I thought I've only been invited because I need to manage the recording and the platform, and then I thought you're going to say you can't think of someone that has more EQ than I have. But yeah, I heard you didn't say that, which is better.
So Karina, both statements you thought that I'm going to say is not what I'm going to say, and I'm very glad to have you here, even though everybody on the line, we started off by inviting Karina to participate in the session by saying to her that it's going to be 5 minutes. She doesn't have to worry. And at the end of the day, we positioned her as a very key and very critical part of this webinar. So Karina, thank you again for being fooled into taking part of this webinar as well. But you can imagine, everybody can imagine that there's lots to say, and that if we plan on being able to cover everything that we want to present on and want to show you, we need to start with the agenda. Thank you, Anneke. Yes, that's on cue, right? So we're going to start with just defining the aim of the session. So we are starting with what we want to end with, and we really hope that you all will find the session as really valuable. So I am going to really define what we're aiming to achieve. we will briefly touch on the EQI model. And then Anneke will be taking us through, again, very high level research on what we found with emotional intelligence related to academic performance. And then there's 3 case studies that each of us will be taking you through. The idea behind them is absolute application areas, insights in terms of the process that we've followed, and hopefully some learnings for you in terms of how we've done it and where the value in the processes that we followed lied. So there's a one-on-one case study. So in an individual one, there's a group profile that focused on a youth leadership group. And then there's a group feedback session that is actually still ongoing and involves a lot of students, which Karina will be taking you through. On that note, let's quickly focus on the aim of this session. Now, the aim of the session is, again, as I said, to reconfirm the important role that EI plays in academic performance. I think most of us who is attending the session knows this and are quite comfortable with this, but we did think that it's important for us just to touch on, again, the research, not only mentioning it, but to touch on what the actual data is telling us currently. And then, as I said, the actual application of the EQI youth, some tips around the application of the assessment, and then ultimately to understand how this tool, this assessment, is currently being used, and that it's really just the start of a whole developmental journey for the either student or the group of students that's taking part in the process. So for us to achieve this aim, we need to just ensure that all of us are on the same page. Now, I know we've got practitioners who are already EQI Youth certified online, but we also have practitioners who is still interested in becoming certified on the webinar as well. So I want to take 2 minutes and just explain the model very briefly. Now, right at the center of this model, you'll see emotional intelligence. Now, the EQI Youth version and also the EQI 2.0 is the world's leading measure of emotional intelligence. Now, this model is built around what is known as trait-based emotional intelligence and can be loosely defined as a set of emotional and social skills that influences the way in which we express and perceive ourselves, how we develop and maintain relationships, how we cope with challenges and demands, and how we use all of this emotional information to really go around the world in an effective and a meaningful manner. Now you can see it's a really holistic and a thorough approach to measurement, and looking at the model, you'll see that there's 5 composite scales and 15 facet scales, all measured within both the EQI 2.0 and the youth version, which is thoroughly being discussed in the certification training, which I won't be able to go into more depth into at this point in time. But what you can see is on the outer rim of this model, it relates to performance and well-being and emotional and social functioning. And what we all know is that emotional intelligence is proven to be really a key indicator of human performance and essential to development. Now, people with higher emotional intelligence communicate more effectively, they form stronger relationships, and they really create powerful coping strategies. And what is magic about this is this can actually be measured. So it's to some extent more accessible than something like IQ. And unlike IQ, it can actually be strengthened and developed. So hence also the reason why it is so critical to invest and to improve emotional intelligence in general. Now, on that note, I think you'll find it very interesting to listen to what Anneke has to say in terms of the actual research of what we found in South Africa, which Anneke, I know I'm going to mention it, but which you also presented on earlier in the year. But over to you.
Thank you, Jan. Okay, so as Jani just explained, how our emotional intelligence often relates to well-being and performance, and in this youth context, academic performance, which is also a reason why we focus so strongly on emotional intelligence. Now, it is firstly important to mention, and Jan mentioned it as well, that we acknowledge emotional intelligence along with cognitive ability, and that both of these aspects forms part of an individual's functioning. So these two aspects work together, and a person's context also have an influence. But for us as practitioners, to make the largest impact to help youth reach their full potential, we should focus on the aspects that can develop, like emotional intelligence, as Jan just mentioned, because cognitive ability is more or less stable, and your emotional intelligence is something that can develop based on the EQI 2.0 model. So especially if we think of the positive relationship that has been confirmed between emotional intelligence and academic performance in multiple research studies, meaning higher emotional intelligence is related to increased academic performance. But where do we start and where do we focus our efforts? At JVR, we firstly wanted to see for ourselves if this assessment of emotional intelligence, the EQI Youth, also produces similar results, which it did. So it also confirmed that relationship between emotional intelligence and academic performance. So as Jan just mentioned, we presented some of the results at the International Test Commission's conference earlier this year. And we are also busy putting together an academic article with regards to the findings as well. But please note, this is just a high-level overview of the findings. In our next EQI Youth Masterclass during the first quarter of 2022, we will speak more about the details involved in this research. But firstly, without further ado, we firstly conducted analyses using the EQI Youth Junior Form results and academic year marks for children between the ages of 7 and 13 years. And we had the data of about 200 children. And the main finding showed that the strongest and most consistent significant relationships were present between the interpersonal scale and all the subject areas. So the correlation size were about 0.28, which is actually more than what was found in other studies. And this finding tells us that when we do interventions in this age group, we should keep in mind that the interpersonal aspects of emotional intelligence could be a good place to start, as our relationships often forms a foundation for learning and teamwork, etc. So please note, this does not mean that we should discard other aspects of emotional intelligence. It only just confirms or highlights the importance of the interpersonal aspect. When looking at the EQI Youth Adolescent Form for adolescents between the ages of 12 and 19 years, we had the academic year marks and EQ scores of between 220 and 285 participants, depending on their subject choices. Now, in this case, the decision-making composite seemed to be the most dominant predictor of academic performance, especially when considering overall year average, languages, and life orientation. So again, an area to potentially start with in terms of intervention, but also this information could have an impact on curriculum development or on a policy level as well. So very important research that we do or did here, and that should, which was basically the first of its kind on this specific assessment, and had lovely findings that could confirm what we see in other literature as well. But now over to Jani to start us off on the more practical aspects of what we are presenting today. Over to you, Jan.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Annika. So it's great to see. I saw a comment in the chat section as well saying that, man, it's fantastic results. And we absolutely agree. It's something that we're extremely excited about. Again, just reconfirming why we need to work more actively in this realm, together with our youth. at all ages. Now, what we've found in the past is that we, sometimes have practitioners saying that they tend to want to make use of an emotional intelligence measure there where kids already struggle, or where there are certain very obvious gaps in terms of their own emotional and social skills. But the first case study that we thought of taking you through is a case study of personal development. Now, I am going to quickly go through the process that we followed, just for more very practical view of exactly what we've done, the context descriptions and also the outcomes, and then we're going to look at what we've learned in this process. Now, the parents approached us, or the mom approached us saying, you know what, she's good, beautifully well-adjusted, healthy kids, a brother and a sister, but they do believe in holistic development, and she wants to instill this from a very young age. And she would love if we could start with that process together with them, and that there's no specific need or no specific outcome except for personal insight and personal development that she would love us to explore with them. So the first step was just to determine exactly what the need and what the outcome should be of the parents being involved. The second step is what we typically do is we've got a Google form which we set up with a number of qualitative questions that we typically ask the students. And that is anything from contact details in terms of their email addresses if they have, through to what their favorite subjects are and what they enjoy doing at school, and even a little bit of a touch on values, for example, which of the following, we provide them with a series of values, do they value more than others? We do touch on certain career-related questions as well, what careers they've ever dreamt of doing, and what they would, for example, do if they had limitless money and time, for example. So quite a number of qualitative questions that we ask them and send through to the kids for them to complete and then resubmit to us. That then guides us typically in terms of what assessments should be used. There's, sometimes you do identify areas that you want to explore more than others through this qualitative measure, and then other times it's quite straightforward. In this specific instance, we identified the EQI youth as something that would be valuable, and then also the MMTIC. For those of you who don't know, it's a type-based personality assessment. Similar to the MBTI, it's just a youth version. The third step, so they then complete it online, click on the links themselves, complete the assessments themselves, and we get the reports. We then scheduled a clarification session separate to, so for the brother session, separate to the sister's session, where we predominantly focused on the qualitative information that they've provided as, building rapport, exploring some of their needs, whether that is either aligned or whether there's any other specific needs that they would have other than what the mom identified as being important. But it's a very friendly, informal conversation, just, as I said, predominantly discussing the qualitative information. We then also identified that they would be comfortable, because we did ask for confirmation and consent, if they would be comfortable for us to provide the assessment results in a group setting with their mom, their dad, and their brother taking part in this developmental session as well, which both brother and sister confirmed. Us also not identifying any sensitivities at that point in time. So we did go ahead to schedule a session where all four was sitting together on an online basis, meaning it was a virtual session that was scheduled. And that is also where we had this combined feedback session. That is where we discussed the MMTIC framework from a personality perspective, and also an EQI youth framework and how those relate to one another. And then the last session, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail as to some of the findings and some of the conversations that we've had in a second. But I just want to go to step 6, was then a follow-up email summarizing some of the conversations that we had, identifying some of the actions that they identify, the stuff that they want to work on, and also a follow-up session scheduled 4 weeks later, just to touch base as to, was it useful? Is it useful? What's working? What's not? Do they need some more clarification? But you can see the ongoing nature of understanding and implementing the results that we've of information that we gathered through the use of these two assessments. Now, just to give you an idea, so we did say that the parents believe on lifelong learning. So this is a really holistic development initiative that they wanted to embark on. So brother and sister team, as I said, brother is now grade 11 and the sister being grade 8. Both of them are in boarding. They actually grow up on a farm, a very high potential family in general, meaning that the mom is a general practitioner or a medical doctor and the dad is a chartered accountant, and high achieving both parents and kids. Exceptional academic performance. I mean, this was stuff that I've not seen in my life before in terms of their ability, their academic ability. Well-adjusted, really gifted kids in that regard. But it doesn't mean that there's no development. Even though they do perform at school, there are no big concerns. There are still room for improvement and development. Now, the information that you're looking at are some of the information gathered in the qualitative questionnaires. And you can see, I want to just highlight well-adjusted kids, meaning that they are performing both on academic and a social level. What I also want to highlight is some of the strengths that they identified, strengths and stretches that they identified. Stretches referring to development areas they believe they ought to be working on. Now, David in grade 11 mentioned that it's really tough for him to meet strangers, and he sometimes feels as if he struggles to show as if he cares for others. The stretches that was identified by Lucy was predominantly, she found it difficult to share her own emotions with others. Now, again, a lot more conversation, a lot of other aspects that we did explore and that we did discuss, but these are the ones that I just want to highlight to you. Now, if we go to the MMTIC results, that was, now for those of you who are familiar with type theory, it might be a little bit easier to understand. But for those of you who are not, I just want to give you a brief indication of what their personality type results showed to be. For David, he came out to be a really clear ISTJ. Now, the MMTIC report is nicely compiled so that actually it provides you with insights in terms of your own type, but it also then provides you with insights in terms of what are your strengths, what are those things that stretches you, and also, how can you go about improving your studying? How can you go about improving your social relationships? How do you really interact with teachers and parents? And what are those things that you might need to work on based on your personality type? Now, the screen that's in front of you just captures the fact that he's an ISTJ. And ISTJs are typically seen as these responsible realists. They can be viewed as quite detached. They are really analytic. They are logical, practical, factual, highly efficient, highly dependable, very conscientious people. They tend to be somewhat reserved from an introversion perspective, as systematic and organized. And one can see this with his academic achievement as well, the way in which he prioritizes, work and play, etc. But a really responsible kid. Abotia, I do see your hand being raised. I am going to just complete the slide and then let's see if we can facilitate a question possibly. In the stretches for typical ISTJs, well, I do highlight one of the areas that is highlighted as a type stretch possibly for this boy as well, is to understand the moods of others and how it impacts their choices. So him being so enormously factual and realistic in his approach, they sometimes do struggle with a little bit more of an emotional understanding and emotional or the flavor that actually directs some decision making, and especially what he needs to have to understand other people's attention as well. I do want to, Aboti, I wonder if it's possible for you to keep your question for me to go through, and then we can possibly raise it at the end. So if you move to the next slide, I do want to highlight the following EQI youth results. Now, again, I just want to make sure that everybody understands these are well-adjusted, healthy kids. That's only who wants to invest in some more development. You can also see that with their emotional intelligence profile. They are balanced in the mid-range, nothing too concerning in that regard. So in context, however, it doesn't mean that they don't have development areas, and one can immediately see. So for those of you who are not familiar with this report output, that is the handout to parents and kids. It is a 2-pager, and you'll see that I've now copied it into one screen just for ease of use, but you can see that he's slightly lower on emotional self-awareness, slightly on the lower on your emotional expression, and then you can see that on the interpersonal relationship facet as well. Now, in the qualitative information, we did say that, he said that, you know what, sometimes I do struggle understanding other people's intentions and emotions. We did also then see in the being an ISTJ, it's not something that typically comes natural to them or that they find as easy. It's typically stretching that left hand, him needing to practice that as well. And in the discussions with the results, he clearly identified that the self-awareness, being aware of his own emotions and expressing those emotions, are 2 areas that he typically keeps as a quite closed door, meaning that he typically is viewed as a closed door, and that indirectly then affects some interpersonal relationships again. There was many scenarios and discussions around how it plays out, and how the parents experiences it, and how he experiences it, and there were practical tips and discussions around how one can actually broaden his vocabulary in terms of trying to improve his way of expression. He also mentioned that, for example, he doesn't necessarily always know what it is, but also what the name of it is. So quirky actions like watching more romantic love stories, and actually the mother asking him, what do you think? How do you think that person would feel if that happens to that person? Actually talking about emotions a little bit more in the household. Interestingly enough, when we went through the type information, both the dad and the mom also identified as being a thinking individuals who tend to possibly spend less time with your emotional decision-making aspect than what feelers would do. But what I'm trying to get to is how the different sources of information spoke to one another, and how it also needs to make sense when you start implementing this in terms of development initiatives and actions that they need to take. One cannot, identify a development area within the EQI youth without considering their context, their age, and something like, for example, their personality type is really useful to understand so that it fits to what they would actually pursue in doing. If we go to Lucy for a second, and I'm very aware of time, Lucy came out to be an ISFJ, and again highlighting here at the bottom 2 areas that is typically stretches for ISFJs, and it is to put their needs in front of needs in front of others, and also being quite assertive and expressive in terms of their own opinion. If we go to the youth results, and Apologies for moving slightly faster through the information. One can see an overall mid-range, healthy profile, again, well-adjusted, nothing to be concerned about. But if you delve a little bit deeper into the facet scales, one do pick up on the assertiveness being on the low range and the impulse control being on the high end. Again, with conversations together with Lucy and parents, it was quite clear that even though impulse control is high, it can also add to her overthinking whether she can think of herself, overthinking before she actually puts herself first, and overthinking before she expresses herself. So just an interesting combination of her identifying, being able to assert and express her own emotions constructively was identified as something that she qualitatively thought as a stretch. It was identifying her personality type results and again confirmed in the EQI youth. But a note here, and it's just a little bit of learning, is that even though some of the items or facet scales come out to be high, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a strength. It can also be seen as a possible development area in combination with some of the other scales. So learnings with this brother and sister team. First of all, EQI youth doesn't need to be used there where there's already discomfort. It can also be, but in terms of emotional and social skills lacking. It can be used with any and most of us, healthy, functioning individuals and youth, which is sometimes seen as a misconception. The other learning that I just wanted to showcase here is that, especially with youth and especially working with this amount of information, it is important that you do consider other sources as well. It works beautifully when you at least have contextual information together with the EQI youth report and results. And I know that is typically best practice, so most of us go that route now in any case, but it was quite refreshing to see how beautifully this type of information spoke to the EQI youth profile as well, especially when you start implementing application of the EQI youth and development initiatives to make it fit to the personality type as well. And then thirdly, the role that parents play, but caregivers in general, role models and stakeholders in kids' in their infrastructure or in their context. This often, these types of development initiatives, whether it is on a one-on-one basis, need to incorporate some sort of accountability, some sort of support structure, and it can't be done in isolation. So hence also the fact that it was wonderful to see the interaction between parents and kids and trying to understand each other and giving examples of how it plays out, but also after the sessions, how they come back with interesting insights and learnings and how the language within this family unit actually adapted and changed to be more aware of this information about each other, understanding each other better as well. So that brings me to a one-on-one closing of this specific case study. Any questions can be dealt with afterwards as well, but I think let's move into your case study, Anneke, and then we'll see if we've got time for more.
Thank you, Jani. I first would like to apologize. I see some of the delegates are struggling with their sound. Just want to confirm that we will be sending out the recording of the session afterwards. So if all else fails, there will be a chance to listen to it again. So this brings me to the second case study. So the EQI youth can also work well when using it in a group format. For those of you who are not familiar with the EQI output, normally if you assess a group of, for example, 10 students, you would somebody please mute? I'm sorry, I'm hearing a sound in the background, but either way. So if you assess in the students, let's say 10 students, you would get 10 individual feedback reports and 10 practitioner reports as well. So it provides you with a lot of information that you need to align if you would like to provide feedback to the group or relevant stakeholders on the group's profile as a whole. So that is what we will focus on today to show you and provide you with the tools to create an overall group profile more easily when using the EQR Youth Assessment in groups. So when will you normally use such a group profile? Well, in team building, for example, is one of the cases, or school leadership group development. When, for example, school management would like to get a clear understanding of the leadership group's profile as a whole. And that's also what we are presenting then basically in this case study, because it's specifically where we provided feedback to a management group regarding the profile of the student group of learners. Leaders, apologies, where they wanted to get a better overall understanding of the whole group's profile and specifically their strengths and development areas as a group. This is the management group who would be working with the students. It included 9 students who were all at a high school level, and they were already selected as leaders. So they completed the adolescent version of the assessment that's relevant for youth from the ages between 12 and 19 years. So the process that we followed to get our group profile ready were as follows. So firstly, the EQR Youth were administered to all the individuals included in the leadership group via JVR Online, which is the platform where the assessment is hosted. Then the profile data extracts were required after or acquired after everyone completed the assessment. And these extracts are available on JVR Online along with the reports, and the extracts are free of charge. And for those who do not know where to look on JVR Online, our client services team will be happy to assist with instructions in that regard. But either way, just to give you an idea of what this looks like, is you would typically receive an extract which includes information about like demographic information and the name of the student or individual that completed the assessment. Also, the data extract of the scores that they got on each of the subscales, and there's the missing scores, but also on the composite scales here. Then let me just return to the other screen. The data that we extracted from JVR Online was then included in a pre-programmed group profile template that we will make available to everybody in this session. So the data extract profiles were literally copied and pasted into the profile. And let me show you what that looks like, or this report that I'm referring to. So firstly, we have on the first page just basic instructions to assist you in how to populate this specific group report template. On the second page, there is some basic information that you can include with regards to the school name or the group and team name and some of the dates. And then on the third page, this is where you would basically copy and paste the data extracts from JVR Online that I just showed you that page of. You would copy and paste it into this sheet just as it is. And just one point of importance is that sometimes the values, if you paste it in here, it gets pasted as a text format and it should be number format. So just be mindful of that. But either way, and from here, it automatically generates a group report, which it indicates, for example, composite scale averages, also subscale averages in the case of the adolescent form. Remember, the junior form only reports on composite scale level. And it also provides some information or demographic information of the group as a whole, in terms of age and your gender distribution and so forth. And then after that, that's basically the profile that we used to provide an overall feedback or just insights to the management group. And I will be speaking about it a little bit later in terms of the process that I followed further, but there was an individual on the management team that would then be EQRU certified and would host kind of like the group feedback for the learners that I worked with, as well as provide individual feedback to the different individuals. So if we have a quick look at the group's profile, I would like to highlight how we use the group profile in our feedback. So we had a look at the profile in terms of what the average scores were, but you will see that basically everything is in the mid-range, and that seems not helpful at all. But if you look at the details, you do see that, for example, the majority of the group were in the high range on decision making, and the majority of the group were in the low range for interpersonal skills. So that would be clear in the, development areas and a clear strength for the specific group. For further meat to the information, and I'm just going to run through this very quickly because I'll highlight it a little bit later. It's just it provided more context in terms of why the interpersonal scale was so low. So we see that they do have a development area in terms of the interpersonal relationships, and we see problem solving is a good strength of theirs, as well as independence. But if we move forward to the outcome of this case study, we provided the feedback to the management group where we identified the strengths and the development areas and some ideas of how management could manage this leadership team and ensure implementation so that the EQI learnings can be taken further. And so, as I mentioned, there were a professional that were EQRU certified afterwards that provided the feedback to the group so that they could remain aware of the group's profile, but also individual feedback so that they could see how they fit into the bigger group. But we talked through the whole profile and touched on other scales as well, and why it is important for leadership specifically. But for now, I am only going to share three of our main recommendations. Firstly, we had interpersonal relationships. So we suggested that they continuously focus on this by encouraging social get-togethers for the team, or encourage the students to engage with at least one new person, and during interactions to make a point to listening to that person to understand and not listening to respond. Then independence. So even though this was one of the highest scores, we made them aware that this might be a potential blind spot, because if the whole team is overly independent and the interpersonal relationships are low, there's a potential of them to become overly self-directed. So we suggested that they encourage the team to take a collaborative approach in decision-making during frequent meetings. And then emotional expression. So we suggested an emotional or emotion check-in in each meeting to encourage talking about the expression of emotions. For example, making a point to smile more when appropriate, just one of the examples. Then the main value of this specific case study is that we provide, the plan is for us to provide the practitioners with an easy way to compile a group report themselves. So to narrow down all the a lot of the information to a more tangible and usable format, but also to display how the EQI Youth group profile can add value to a group as a whole. So we start with the EQI Youth measure on an individual, but it can also add value to a group. And with this, I'm handing over to Karina. Karina?
Yes, we're always looking for the button.
There you go.
Thank you, Anneke. I was mindful of the time as well. I wanted to say, Jani, you say I've got so much to say, but you give me so little time. So Anneke, if I may ask, if you can just check whether anyone drops off the call, and if they come back, if you can just admit them, because there's just too many things happening on my screen at the moment. Thanks a lot. Okay, so the third case study that we are talking about is much less about the assessment itself. It started off with the assessment, but I would rather want to talk a little bit more about the context and the process that followed after we've done the assessment, or we had the assessment done, and then talking a little bit about what nice products came or what nice things we developed as part of the process, and then a few takeaway learnings. So if we go to the context, the client was or they are still an NPO, a not-for-profit organization. They've been around for many, many years. They focus on entrepreneurship development. And they believe that one can develop entrepreneurs by making sure that you provide them with quality education, and then also other support programs, entrepreneurship development programs. Now, I've just indicated here, and I've actually mentioned there right at the bottom, and this comes from their vision as well, where they want to cultivate high impact responsible entrepreneurship, and they want to nurture potential through an ecosystem of partners, programs, and resources. And part of their, they've got a nice systemic approach, but they also think about, Adeka is very quick for me now, but they also look at it from a holistic perspective. So they say, you know, we can't wait to develop entrepreneurs only when you get to a point where you have to start thinking about your business and build your business. They actually start, they look at a variety of development levels, starting with high school, then university level, and then the entrepreneurs after that graduated. Maybe just to say that JVR has been involved with this client for a number of years now. And the last 3, 4, 5 years, we only focused on the university students. And then this year we started focusing on also the entrepreneurial candidates. And then the project that we are going to talk about now is the high school one as well. So you need to bear in mind that the organization catches the kids when they move to high school, and they support them through high school, through their university studies, and also then the first couple of years when they start a business, and then they become alumni as well, where they have further support. So it's really a lifelong support that they do with these individuals. Okay, so the process, the children completed the EQI youth. Now, of course, you know, I'm interrupting my own thinking here. You know, everything that happens before that to get the EQI youth completed and to put the process together and to put the yeah, it was a very long time. But anyway, they completed the EQI youth, and then we've done a group feedback for them. We haven't done a group report, or I'm not going to talk about a group report here, but obviously it would be nice to have a group report as well, because they're working with a specific group of children that may have similar development needs. And then what we've done is we've developed a playbook as an output to develop emotional intelligence as well. So yes, it's like Jani mentioned, it's important to measure anything, you know, what you want to measure, but what do you do about it? You know, if the doctor only measures our blood pressure and tells us it's high or low, then, you know, you need to do something about it as well. Same with psychological constructs. So how this works is the children are being identified. They apply when they are in grade 6. And then during the first 6 months of grade 7, they sort of go through a selection process. They have to have very good academic abilities already, and academic performance. I think they need to have at least 70% they really need to have a need for support, financial support. And then this organization has partnered with a number of very well-known private and public schools where they place these kids then in the school. So all of that happens in grade 7. What they found is that the reason why they also need to bring in support or more support, they're already providing them with support while they are in high school, but the transition from grade 7 to grade 8 is quite big. And I think for those of you who have kids, for many of us, we know it is a huge transition by itself. But if you just think about the fact that they must, all these kids come from really backgrounds where they are, they haven't had a lot of exposure to many things. They didn't have the luxuries of extra classes and all of those kinds of things, coming from backgrounds where they, in the house, they barely speak English. And then all of a sudden they are being placed in a very high functioning school environment. And it creates a lot of stress and a lot of difficulties and adjustment problems for these children. So they've thought that instead of only catching them in grade 8 or starting with the development and the support in grade 8, they wanted to start earlier. So this year we had the opportunity to start earlier, completing the EQI youth. I actually asked for feedback. I'm waiting for feedback from them to hear how this whole process is going as well. You will see right at the bottom, I also indicate that we did mentor training as well. So for each of these kids, there's a mentor. And obviously we had to align the whole process of what is happening with the development of the high school kids. We have to align that with the mentor training as well. So they also completed the EQI, obviously the workplace report, because they are all working individuals. But the nice thing is the model is the same. So the process, the concept, everything is exactly the same. We did a workshop with them where we talked about, how do you use this workbook to support them? How do you look at the, obviously they can't interpret the reports, but at least if they have a report in front of them, the very basic report that we also give to the kids or their parents, they would be able to help the individual identify some development areas as well. Then in grade 8, which will be next year for them, they will continue with this journey with their mentors. And then around June, July, August, we will do a post-assessment to actually see to what extent did the intervention, this whole mentor support program, the playbook, the discussions, I call it critical CCs, critical conversations, during which they would then discuss the development areas. Thank you, Annika. So in terms of output, so the program was called My Journey to Self. And that was, we didn't come up with that, the organization itself, they said this is what they want to call it. So what we created was very nice mentor empowerment workshops where they really understood themselves or had the chance to be understood. But we almost did it like in an, what's the word that I'm looking for now? They were almost, they had empathy with the children. They had to be in the children's shoes while they were in the classes, while during the workshops. So we've gone through a lot of exercises with them, gave them ideas, things that they can use with the kids as well. So we really made it very hands-on. So that was a very nice output to also look at the mentors' levels of emotional intelligence, but also develop them to be a mentor. Then we had the scholar feedback workshop where it was a group workshop. We had all the mentors in the workshop. We had parents in the workshop. We had kids in the workshop. and it was a 3-hour workshop that was really nice and interactive as well. And that in itself also supported the mentors to get to know the assessment a little bit better, and also to get more ideas of the strengths and the development areas, or the stretches, as Jani calls them, of these kids. And then the very nice, exciting thing, I think this was a highlight of my year, was the interactive playbook that we developed under a lot of pressure. And we were a team of 3 or 4 people who developed the content. And I'll talk about that a little bit now. And we have an in-house designer who developed the workbook also. So at the start of all the workshops, we had this picture, and the mentors and the scholars really identified with this picture as what they would like this program to facilitate. So being prepared for the next phase of my school life, being my own superhero, and being able to tackle the next year face on. Thanks, Annika. So maybe just the aim of the playbook, it is mostly for self-development, and I've just copied the equipping the youth with an entrepreneurial mindset. I've copied that from their website, and it's really in line with that. So to equip these youth with certain skills that they can cope with very well, and then also to facilitate a discussion with the mentors, or with their parents, or with the teacher as well, for that matter. When we developed the workbook or the playbook, we looked at all the EQ principles, but it was very important for us to understand the context of these children or these kids. So we had mentor interviews, ones that have been working with the scholars for the last couple of years now. We had scholar interviews, so current grade 8, and that was lovely. We got such a lot of rich information to work with when we developed the workbooks. And then also the organization also did profile research, looked at what's the profile of these students. The final product, we had a workbook that stretches over 12 weeks. The 12 weeks will be covered in 6 sessions. Remember, we only developed it, or we finalized it almost by September, October. There weren't that many weeks left, so they would have had 6 lessons and sessions, and in total they would have covered 36 lessons. So it would be 3 lessons per week. We decided beforehand that we are going to take a story telling approach, where we created a relatable story based on the interviews or the data that we got from the mentors and the scholars and the profile. We created the story, and the storyline went through the workbook, through the playbook. Also, we decided not to focus on, let's say, lesson 1, we only look at self-awareness, and lesson 2, we look at self-expression. We didn't want to do it like that, because life doesn't work like that. So we integrated all the different elements in the story, and we made sure that we cover in one exercise, in one story, we covered 2, 3, 4 of the EQ elements. Thanks, Annika. The 2 characters was Karabu and Abigail. These characters also form part of the look and feel of the organization, and so we decided to use them as well. We named them. They were actually busy with a competition to have these 2 named, but we had to produce a book beforehand, so we just went for Karabu and Abigail, and the whole story went around their friendship and Karabu, that both of them were in grade 8, going to the school with lots of opportunities and lots of things to choose from, and feeling a bit out of place, and not knowing how to make decisions, and missing my parents, and all of that. So it actually worked out very well. You can write a nice story around emotional intelligence. Maybe just 1 second about this. Preparation, the mentors had to work through the book themselves as well. They had to know the story, they had to know the activities, and they also had to be able to identify the EQ elements. Before they had a session with the kids, they had to know that they had to ask the kids, you know, what stood out for you. And then also knowing what the profile of the individual looks like, they could actually sort of focus a little bit more on some of the exercises rather than some of the others. And the immediate implementation, then he said you have to have a growth mindset. So if someone tells you, you know, I'm not good at approaching the teacher because I have a problem, and it's all about a growth mindset. So that formed the basis of our development ideas. And then with regards to the long-term implementation, we said this is not a once-off opportunity to use the workbook. You can actually use this workbook up until grade 12. Maybe we are lucky, and when they get to grade 10, they ask us to develop a new one also. And then maybe just when we talked to when we did the training for the mentors, we said what is very important, there's certain magic words that you use. And this is just, I always say these things always work for you in any situation, whether you do therapy or whether you do counseling or whether you have a naughty child at home. You just ask these questions and there's no yes or no involved. And therefore, it's always good to facilitate a conversation. Thank you, Annika. And then just, we can quickly run through this. I just took some screenshots to give you an indication of how we try to make it fun as well. So for example, if we look at this exercise was mostly to identify emotion, so emotional self-awareness, and then also, of course, building a little bit of emotional vocabulary. So this is one exercise that they've done. Ideally, we would like to put this in an app as well, where it's even more interactive, and that was the idea. But the kids have a lot of data issues, we know. This is, I am at home at the moment, but okay, so with regards to maybe also sketching a little bit of a story, and then asking, you know, what would be the best possible response, and specifically dealing with assertiveness. So this is just another example. And throughout the process, you will see a little parable with a mirror, so that it means, you know, now you have to self-reflect and now you have to think a little bit more about yourself. Thank you, Annika. And, you know, just one of the other exercises, and just to show you what it looks like, and there's maybe one or two more. Yeah, just trying to make it a little bit more fun. All sorts of different kinds of elements. Gratitude jar. Of course, we have a story, and then it's the exercise. So the reflections. Always have empathy with your client, understand your client's context.
And then he's still
always have empathy with your client, put yourself in the client's shoes, understand their context, and work with that. Then also another learning is the EQI model and entrepreneurship actually go hand in hand. Last night I attended another webinar from a similar kind of organization, also focusing on entrepreneurship, and the elements that I highlighted was actually had a lot to do with the EQI model and constructs, and that just affirmed the nice link entrepreneurship. And then with regards to my other learning is we shouldn't take life so serious. We have fun while we develop certain components as well. And it was very nice to actually have that fun element, or bring in that fun element into this whole development program. It would be fantastic if it can be online and in a more modern way, but that's the next step. And I think that's me. Sorry, now I took more time as well. Maybe we have a few seconds for one or two questions.
I've got it as 5 minutes past, but I absolutely agree. For those of you who need to drop off, you're more than welcome to do so. But we will be here for one or two questions if there's anybody that would want to ask anything. I know that there's quite a lot of content that we've gone through today, and there will be a follow-up email with our email addresses in as well. If there's anything that you would like to ask us in particular based on any of the case studies that was discussed, we can definitely do so. And if there's anybody that's not either certified on the EQI Youth or have not tried it, you're more than welcome to request a trial as well. You can, test it out, see what you think. How does the information work for you? Is it something that that you find aligned with the processes in your practice? So just checking, is there anybody that would like to ask a question, either in the chat or you can unmute yourself as well?
Well, I was thinking, Jani, maybe I can just mention that, if you're not certified, it's a nice Christmas present for yourself, from yourself to yourself. Or, it's really affordable if you have someone that can actually get it for you. And the nice thing is you can actually do the training on Christmas Day as well, because it's all e-learning. So yeah, more than welcome to contact us for more information on that.
On Christmas Day, I hope that you're going to be having have a better Christmas Day than needing to go through the certification. But you're right, Karina, it will be available on Christmas Day.
I see there's a question from James. So he said, maybe I missed it, but what are the biographical information of the participants? So James, there were basically 3 different studies or case studies that we presented. So I know Jani, she was talking about a brother and a sister that were, I think, in age 16 and age 13. The group that I was talking about were adolescents. They were a leadership group. And there were 10 individuals, also mostly Black participants. Then in terms of Karina's session, she was talking about, I don't know how many were in the group, Karina?
50, 60.
Yeah, 50, 60 participants that were all from a previously disadvantaged background, also in grade 7. So yeah, that's normally aged 13. 12, 13, around there.
Maybe just to add, so the EQI Youth is developed within the South African context with a representative sample in terms of all provinces, all different backgrounds, age groups, gender, except for special needs. So there you do have autism. We didn't include those audiences in the norm group. Am I correct, Anneke?
Yeah, so the main reason for that was in our original ethical application, we did not specify that we would like to include special needs individuals. And if we wanted to, then we would have to start a new ethical application for that specifically, which would have added more time to this. But that's definitely something that we would like to look into, and we are in the process of making contact with different individuals.
I do see that there are some people asking for the presentation and the slides, and yes, that will definitely be shared with you. Both slides, the recording, the tool that Anneke made use of in the group compilation. So that Excel sheet that we've developed to actually generate the group profile will be shared with you. There's a blog post that we can share with some of the academic results and the findings related to the research. That academic article that will be peer review will only be due early next year. Sorry, Anneke, early next year. So, but there are a lot of information that we will share with you, likely going out early next week.
Yeah, so just please give us some time. It's quite a bunch of stuff that we have to put together to make sure that everybody gets their hands on everything.
Fantastic. Any other questions that anybody may have?
Okay. Fantastic. So yeah, I think that then calls this the end of the session for today. And yeah, thank you for everybody that participated and that joined us for this session. And thank you so much to Karina and Jani specifically for sharing their insights and their expertise in this regard.
Thanks so much.
Exciting stuff.
Nice to
Baie
see.
dankie julle, dit was baie interessant geweest, hoor.
Thank you.
Fantastic.